Hello, welcome to Hope in the Light of Suicide. I'm Tammy White. I'm the founder of the Bobby White Foundation and your host. And I have with me, of course,
I am Bonnie Snyder. I am your co-host. Welcome.
welcome everyone. Today we're going to hit again on a different way of the six
Touchstones.
Yeah, well, yeah, but we're going to kind of lines up with the cycles of grief that we go through, but in a different manner. But first, I wanted to mention thank you to WeBeam TV for allowing us to put on the show and bring this information to you. Kindest, we've partnered with them. If you want to help support our show, you can go to our Kindest site, and there's many levels of support that is offered. You can just take a picture of that QR code there in the corner, and it'll take you directly to the page. And also this month, we're fortunate enough again, Greg Schindler's State Farm office, I believe is in North Pinellas, Clearwater, or Tarpon, is doing their monthly fundraiser supporting the Bobby White Foundation again.
Nice.
So all you have to do is, if you need an insurance quote of any type, give them a call, 727-228-8800, and say that you want a quote to support the Bobby White Foundation. And that's going to be going on throughout the month of March.
Nice,
So
nice.
that's pretty nice that they're going to do that. And another thing I want to mention, try at the beginning of the show, that if there's if you are in distress or anyone else that you know is having problems, please call the hotlines. If it's immediate, call 911. If you're having issues, there's a bunch of hotlines. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Please call them. I didn't get a chance to talk to you this week, but we had a teen suicide in our county this weekend.
That's hard. That is hard. It's so sad. I mean, our thoughts and condolences and prayers to that family.
To the family,
Yeah.
and I believe it was a high school student. So the children that are around him and friends, they really need your love and support and prayers as they learn how to navigate this new. Normal is not even a word,
Right.
for something like this. But yeah, it's I don't.
The epidemic, continues. It's not. We would hope, someday in our lifetime that it would go away. But it is very real. It's something that, we often tell ourselves, it's not going to happen to me. This is something that happens to someone else.
Somebody else, yeah.
Until it happens to you, and then your perspective on it changes. Speaking of fundraisers, I also want to thank those of you all that contributed to the Facebook fundraiser that I had, in celebration of my birthday. Don't send me gifts. I don't. Yeah, I've kind of outgrown gifts. For me, it's about giving back and paying it forward, kind of thing. So
And we really appreciate that.
yeah. So no, thank you for everyone who contributed to that.
Yeah, you did pretty good.
I was really, I kept having to move the goal. It's like I set a goal and, I hit the goal, moved it again, hit that goal. So, again, to those of y'all that contribute and continue to support us and this show, you have our heartfelt thanks.
Oh, most definitely. We know personally how difficult this, even listening to us may be for a lot of people. But it is important for us to continue to speak out because of what happened this weekend. there's just no words. I got a text on Tuesday morning from a friend of mine, and it happened to be a friend of her teenage son.
Oh, I see.
And so it just kind of threw my day in a tailspin, because it does. I mean, we may be out here talking and look pretty normal, but when things like that happen, it still affects us tremendously.
There is an effect, and much like we say here, with this platform, is reaching out, to people, having conversations. You never know when, as we said, last week, if you see someone and something looks off, are you okay? As we had Kira on, and she highlighted that, or spoke to that myth. If you ask someone if they're thinking about harming themselves, there's that belief that if I tell you or if I mention it, that's going to put the thought in your mind, when the exact opposite is different.
Right.
That might be the very thing that person needs to talk them off the ledge.
Exactly, because, and I've noticed, and it's been kind of frustrating for me lately, is trying to talk to people who have recently experienced it, getting our purple folders out and kind of getting blown off, because to me it's they still don't want to deal with the reality of it, and everybody has to do that in their own time. But it's also people that haven't dealt with it, they don't want to deal with it either.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, with the experience that I've gone through and gone through with other people, right now, even still, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen to you, if it's going to affect you. It's a matter of when.
Exactly.
Whether you believe it or not. I mean, we never believed it would happen to us.
Well, and even not a when, I hear people say, this will not happen to me. And, I get it in their minds. They're talking about, I'll never experience a suicide death.
Right.
No one in my orbit, is prone to, it's almost like there's a checklist that people use. Well, my inner circle or my circle, does not experience this, does not experience this, does not experience this. So therefore, I'm not going to. It's not, it's important that, we understand that it is not just losing an individual to a suicide. It is the impact that it has on everybody else that's within that, circle. So, like for us, it was a family member. We've lost family members. It affects us, a little different. I caution, however, does it affect us differently? I feel sometimes in a lot of ways it affects us exactly the same. It is the degree that it affects us that's different. Think of it as, burning your hand on a stove. We both suffered a burn. But the question is, mine might be a first degree burn, yours might be a third, or vice versa.
Right.
I think again across the board, I think the feelings are, the experience is the same. It's how we process it that's different.
And that can be true within the family, but close friends of whoever has taken their life. I know that several of our friends, and my husband's coworkers, it has affected them deeply. And again, maybe not to the degree that it's affected me, but it is an effect on somebody's life. It is a traumatic effect on somebody's life. And that's where people acquaintances, it could be family, coworkers, friends that are suicide loss survivors. They are all within that circle. And depending on where they're at mentally or how they're dealing with it, are at a greater risk of suicide than the general public. And this is kind of maybe sort of what happened with your grandson's death, that children that were his age didn't, within a few months, a couple other kids take their lives.
Yes.
And that's what my concern is here in our community with this recent death, and especially with COVID too. That is a huge concern that people really need to pay attention to and address.
You know, the thing with the youth that that took their own lives after Aiden, you know, within like close proximity, the question that comes up relating to their deaths is, were their deaths because of Aiden's? You know, did Aiden start off this chain reaction? Were their deaths just coincidental? You know, like, oh, you know, maybe not connected. It just happened that in that time frame, you know, these, you know, children decided, you know, to take their lives. You know, and I say, regardless, you know, sometimes, you know, we try to put things in this neat little box and make sense of it.
There's not with
that
this.
neat little box does not exist.
Not in this realm. And actually, a couple of years ago, there was a church down in South St. Pete that I gave a couple of programs to, and within a 2 or 3 month period, they had 3 adult males that were between the ages of, say, 35 and early 40s that had taken their life. And that church really, when that happened, they really took the bull by the horns and started bringing in programs, and that's where they brought us in to get involved and bring in some programs. We were able to show Suicide, the Ripple Effect. The foundation owns the licensing rights to show that documentary of Kevin Hines, who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and lived to tell about it. By the way, he is going to be on our show in the first part of April. I think our first show in April. So that's going to be really good. But anyway, we were able to bring that documentary down to that church and for people to view it and, you know, talk, and which, you know, was helpful, but then COVID hit right after. So we really haven't been able to do too much. But I'm going to be checking in with her here shortly again.
You know, and that is something, you know, in this era of, you know, COVID and, you know, being mindful of, you know, well, first we're dealing with something that we've not dealt with before. You know, I can't think in, you know, in the years that I've been alive, if I've ever seen a situation where an illness, you know, a sickness shut down the entire world, affected the entire planet at the same time. You know, and, you know, of course, the isolation and, you know, of course, from that mental health perspective, you know, if you have someone who's isolating already, now they're doubly isolated because, you know, that self-isolation and now that forced isolation because of the pandemic. You know, let's just say you know, we use us as examples. I isolate a lot. But every once in a while, I have the luxury that, you know, you will pop over and, you know, hey, how's it going and everything like that. Well, now we're isolated because of COVID. You, by default, can't come check on me anymore.
Right.
And, you know, here now my risk for, you know, increased depression has gone from here to here. So, having, a platform like this, and, because people are like, I'm so zoomed out, I'm, so
Oh, I know.
meeting out. At the same time, however, yes, I think we're all experiencing that, that camera, contact with each other, fatigue, like I have Zoom fatigue. At the same time, I'm glad that we've been blessed that this new platform has presented itself. Who of us thought about doing web meetings and, video check-ins every, once in a while?
Yeah, families getting together over Zoom because you can't be together during a holiday or something. Which, yeah, we actually all have learned a lot in the past year when it comes to something like that. Did you happen to see the front page of the Suncoast News this week?
I did not.
Okay. Part of this also is on the front page they have that, in which you probably already know this, the overdose rate in Pasco County has increased 71% this year.
Yes. Yes.
71% since COVID. And we were having a hard time with that to begin with, but it seemed like getting a better handle on it until COVID hit.
And the thing with, overdose, people overdosing and whatnot, I don't know how many people are aware of, resources on that realm. Like we have the capability of, distributing Narcan free.
Right.
The issue is just knowing where the pockets exist to get them, and it's a no question, no questions asked.
Yeah, no, and it's a great program for our community. I myself have it with me. I should keep it in my vehicle, but as hot as it is, but I do have a couple doses at home that I got from Rachel, and if more people, had them and knew, like you said, knew where the resources were.
I mean, we've even gone, and people may look at this and say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? We've had, a couple people who have, had Narcan and had to use it, or, we see them with, where'd you get that from? I got it from my drug dealer. So it's like drug dealers are giving their customers Narcan along with the drug. Now, some people are like, really? My personal belief on that is, no, I don't promote, drug dealing, and substance use. At the same time, I'm giving somebody a life-saving measure. We can address the substance use,
Right.
because the way I look at it is this person does not have access to Narcan. They take the drug, they have to be administered Narcan. We've just saved a life. This person is still alive. We can't address this if we don't have a person to address it with. And so, I found it, and it was controversial there for a bit. Like, we're giving the Narcan to the drug dealers. The belief is, would that lead one to assume that we are promoting drug dealing? No. We're promoting saving someone's life.
And potentially getting them home.
Right.
That's hopefully.
Addiction is a disease. Addiction is and I think as, we've progressed to now, and, the stigma has been, is slowly being erased from certain things, that, folks are looking at, addiction, addiction in the same light they look at depression or bipolar. It's a disease. It's something that, can be, that needs to be addressed.
Do you think that that issue is being addressed much better, or I wouldn't say much better because it is still a big issue, more so than and the stigma being reduced more so than suicide.
I don't know that I would necessarily say one is being covered more than the other because they go so hand in hand.
Yes, they did.
You know, if you think about, if I think of, you know, different facets of, mental health, and mental health issues, um, for a long time, stigma was that thing we didn't talk about, or people didn't put a lot of, um, the spotlight wasn't on
Right.
stigma a lot. And I'm thinking because people didn't necessarily equate the two. You know, if you had a mental illness, the conventional wisdom was, you know, it's the family secret. Give them a pill, everything would be okay. Or it's that dirty little secret that we keep in the back corner. We're not going to talk about, Uncle Joe. Forgive me, any Joes, anybody named Joe. Um, we're not going to talk about Uncle Joe, who is the alcoholic. We're going to keep Uncle Joe, in a closet somewhere so no one knows about him. We're not going to talk about Aunt Sally, and again, no offense to anybody named Sally. We're not going to talk about Aunt Sally who suffers from depression, or somebody suffering with any number of mental health issues, because it was thought of to be shameful. There was so much shame attached to it, where it's like, okay, you know what? Let's take the shame and stigma off it. Myself, for instance, I'm an abuse survivor. And I remember for a long time I would not talk about it. There was something wrong with me, or something I had something to be ashamed of. It wasn't until I started sharing my story, much like, us sharing this
Right.
story now, how many people walked up, have come to me. Thank you for sharing your story. Um, God, you're the strongest person I've ever met. Oh, yeah, okay, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. Um, that just it's like putting a face on this situation. Or, when I'm, in schools, talking, substance use disorders with, the students that I talk to, and, it's one thing going in, prior to Patrick, even though, I talked to, about, Patrick's, struggles back and forth, um, but when it comes to, talking about, suicide, substance, mental health disorder, guys, let's put it out on the table and let you know it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's nothing to talk about. What if I told you that, and I would throw things out. The alcoholic can look like Miss Bonnie, and they look for it. What do you think of? And I talk about my own belief systems. Growing up, when someone said alcoholic, I thought about, the grungy looking guy sitting on a street corner in a gutter with a brown paper bag,
Right.
wrapped around a bottle. No, the alcoholic can look like me, could look like you, could look like, the doctor that, we go and see tomorrow. You know, don't be, ashamed to talk to someone. Granted, you have to be comfortable doing it. Long answer to the short question. When addressing one, we address the other. So we're not able to talk about suicide loss, or substance addiction, or whatever, until we reconcile the fact that um, you know there's no shame. Let's take away the stigma, the shame from it. At the same time, if we address the stigma, taking the shame out of it, we can address this. So it's hard to say, well, this one's addressed more than the other.
Well, yeah, because really there's so much intertwined with suicide. It's it's not suicide isn't like, hey, one little package that you can just set on a counter and try and figure it out. It is multi-level, extremely complex. I could see that with my own husband's death. He had a chronic illness for 25 years. He had multiple sclerosis. He had alcohol issues, especially that got worse in the last few years of his life. The mental part of even those two things. The last week he was alive, there were issues at work. Not of his doing, but he was such a perfectionist and was worried about the outcomes. And I mean, there was just, it was like the perfect storm for him.
Mhm.
And did one weigh higher than the other? But, you know, we'll never know.
That is, yeah.
And that's, you know, and that's the complexity of suicide. And not just with my husband, but with, you know, most people that do take their lives. It's not one issue.
I mean, even if we
Addicted
use
to that.
Aiden, you know, it is, if he and his girlfriend had not broken up, you know, that, you know, the day, you know, he died, would he still be here? Was it something else? And you know, he was seeing someone, you know, he's seeing someone professionally, you know, for some, you know, his, you know, depression or what he was dealing with. But you're right, you can't, you know, I cannot subscribe to, well, if we take this block out, this wouldn't happen. Or if I use Patrick, you know, if I'd not gone, you know, back to Jersey that weekend, would he still be here? Perhaps. Or would, you know, the only difference would have been I would have found out that evening instead of 12 hours later when I came home. You know, like an hour after his
Right.
death versus 12 hours after his death. Would that have been the only difference? Would he have died at home versus at a friend's house? You know? You know, so, you know, again, it is, you know, back to eliminating the need to put things in this neat little box, eliminating the concept of, you know, the stigma attached, you know, to. I sometimes think stigma serves as a justification. You know what I mean?
Kind of. I never even kind of looked at it that way. But that's
Yes.
That's just kind of interesting.
My brain works weird sometimes. You know, it's like this is. Let's just, we'll use a good one, and yeah, it's a nice segue into. I'm looking forward to our, you know, next week that our guest, you know, our guest is going to, the guest we'll have next week. Like when Kira said, you know, we're going to pray for his soul because of the way he died, you know, so it's like, well, wait a minute. I'm going to justify not talking about it in this aspect because it belongs in this little box. And if I can, and I'm not saying this is true, if I can avoid talking about it because it's a taboo subject, that's my justification for not addressing it.
And that's not healthy.
Well, you know,
And, I mean, that goes. I mean, one of the this Touchstone Sic in the wilderness of suicide, grief, finding your way, is understand the 6 needs of mourning, and the first one is actually accept the reality of the death, and especially in the beginning, that is extremely hard to do, but it can be still hard months or years later to accept the reality of the death.
oh yeah, I find myself to this day, you know, and we're going, you know, we just, you know, it was like celebrated, experienced, you know, 2 years since Aiden's loss. You know, of course, subsequently coming up on 2 years after Patrick, I still find myself, I can't believe you're gone. Or, I was with my grandson last night, and the door just opened, inadvertently, by itself. I was at an appointment with him, and the door opened, and, the person that we were talking with, is there a ghost in here? And as we're talking, he made a comment about one of his video games just deleting itself on its own. And I was like, that's, Patrick. Yeah, it's Patrick. And I'm like, if that's so weird, you should still be here.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first sentence here under that is, you can know something in your head, but not in your heart. And that's what happens quite often when someone takes their own life.
Yes.
We know it is a reality, but in here, I mean, even with me, we're going to be coming up on 5 years for Bobby here next month, and it's the heart. Even though, okay, yeah, I know this is true. I know this is what the last 5 years were. I don't know what happened, but you can't. It's hard to still, and probably forever to accept in your heart that someone that you love so much took their life.
And the other thing too, what I find with that head heart thing is when you find yourself doing, something, a task. I'll use, for example, whether it's something as innocuous as going out to dinner, or going to a movie, going kayaking to the beach, and later on, you get that tug in your heart, because your head is saying you just had fun, and your heart is saying, how dare you have fun because that person isn't here. It's the we're supposed to go on living,
And that's what they would want us to do.
Exactly.
But I don't really have that. I have it in my heart where it's like, you should be here doing this with me. I don't really so much have the guilt per se if I have a little bit of that happiness, but the afterwards is, you're supposed to be here with me doing this, or we've always done this together. And I mean, I talk to myself. I do it when I'm up blowing off the roof on my house.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, hon, I'm up here blowing off the roof. You're supposed to be doing this. I don't mind. I enjoy it because it just reminds me of him, and somehow I feel closer. But it's still that you're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be here doing that, and you're not.
Which is, a really nice segue into letting yourself feel the pain of the loss. And it's like, I believe we feel pain at different levels, where, you're blowing off the roof, and it's like, hon, you're supposed to be here with me. And, correct me if I'm wrong, in one ways it's I still feel you with me, because I'm doing something that you would have done. At the same time, this really, this hurts.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're not here with me. I think of, when I'm doing things, around the house, taking, something is taking the trash out. Like, I have a nephew at my house. My nephew, takes the trash out. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I appreciate you taking the trash out. But in my head, in my heart, I'm like, Patrick used to take the trash out. Or when I'm, one of our favorite, hobbies was, let's go clean the garage. And we clean the garage, only to, a couple of weeks later, didn't we just clean the garage? Why does it look like this now? Why does it look like this again?
We have a shop out back that was that way too.
Yeah.
Our workshop, yeah.
And so as I'm, reorganizing, taking, the wooden cabinets. The previous, I had my house for 12 years, but the previous owner had like the wooden shelves. I'm not a fan of the wood. So little by little, I've taken all the wooden cabinets and shelves out and replaced it with metal. As I'm doing this, however, I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, Pat, I wonder, or I'm looking at it, so what do you think? If you were here, or I tell myself, I wonder if I'm going to move another, box or something from a wall, and there's going to be a huge spider behind it, and just recalling, the last time we cleaned the garage together and moving a bag of sand and this huge spider on the wall, and I'm like, get it, and Patrick, taking care of this spider for me. Yeah, again, being allowed to feel that pain, but feeling the pain on different levels. Sometimes it's a good pain. The majority of times it's I don't like this. But
Well, and like they say in here, your pain's going to ebb and flow for months and years. I mean, years. I just see that. But you do, you have to be patient with yourself. And sometimes I'm not.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes I feel like I'm maybe a little too patient with myself, But like your garage thing, we have a workshop, and it really needed. I've cleaned it out 3 times and still haven't got it to where I want. But when I started going through there and going through Bobby's tools and his toolbox and stuff, and I'm finding, we had 3 solder irons and 3 or 4 that, and I'm like, hon, why do we have 3 of these? Talking to him, I'm like, we're 1 or 2 people, and we're not going to be doing it at the same time. We've got this collection of tools and, collection of wrenches. Like, how many sets of wrenches do we need? I'm not going to be able to use all these at once.
I mean,
But
it's
funny.
that's something we have in common. Same thing with I'm like, we had this thing. Hey, do you know where the hammer is? No, I don't know. So one of us would run to the hardware store and buy another hammer. And before I knew it, we were looking at each other. There's 12 hammers in this house. And, for a while, like you and Bobby, it was, Patrick and I in the house. We've got 12 hammers. I have a toolbox. That was Patrick's. You always have that toolbox that goes in the car, he had his own, toolbox that, I need to get, my hammer, my screwdriver and whatnot, versus I don't want to go to the garage and go through the toolbox itself. I refuse. Like, I'll use his tools out of his toolbox. I find myself making sure his tool has to go back to his toolbox.
Right.
So that it's not missing, or I'm doing something and he's got this little mini hammer, and that's Patrick's hammer. It needs to go back in his toolbox.
Well, and that's kind of part of the third one is remembering the person who died.
Yes.
And that's why I like working in our shop. We years ago when we lived in Fort Lauderdale, my mom sent us a pattern to make these wood baskets,
Mm-hmm.
and Bobby ended up starting to make them. He kind of like just took it over, and we made them for years when we first moved up here. Some of them, some people still have them. They're like 30 years old. They're made out of cypress.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have a cypress mill on 52. I was so sad that it closed up because they're widening it. But anyway, he had made a table, and he has the pattern laid out on this table. And he hadn't made them for, years. And I tried to get him to do it later. And so after he passed away and I started cleaning things up, and he had, these forms for setting the basket on when you got so far and everything all measured out. And so I started making some again a couple of years ago. And it just, and then finding, tools that were specific to him. I bought him years ago it's kind of like a branding iron,
Mm-hmm.
with his initials on it. And so working out there in the shop and getting it all kind of cleaned up and rearranged again, that's, you remember the things and they're not in that environment for me, or working in the yard, which the yard work was his job for the most part. Working there or sitting on the lawnmower for 5 hours, that's where I feel close to him. And those are times when I have feelings and remembering him that aren't so sad and so hurtful or painful.
Yeah, for me, it is Patrick's room. And I shared for the longest time, and it was several months. It was hard for me to go in and take everything out of his room, because we'd started remodeling his room, before he passed, like, putting, paint colors on the wall. What do you think about this color? What do you think about this color? Do we want to do hardwood? Do we want to go back to carpet? And initially, we were going to do, hardwood. I remember after, everything coming out of his room, and I'm looking, I took pictures of it, in the transition, what his room looked like before I pulled everything out, what it looked like when the room was completely stripped and bare, and then, painting each wall, and then putting the carpet down, and then putting the furniture painstakingly, with a couple of exceptions. Pictures that he had on his wall are back in the spot that he had them, when he was here. Like, he has this picture of the Joker, and the wall that he had it on, it's back on that wall. And for a while, it will always be, Patrick. I've always called it Patrick's room. This is Patrick's room. Well, my grandson is with me now. My grandson, sleeps in that room. It took a minute for me to, when you go to Pat's room, I call it, what I'm talking about, are you going, you be in your room, so I'm like, oh, it's his room now. I walk in, the chest of drawer, the dresser, the bureau, it's set up with Patrick's stuff. And then, one of those, we talk that head heart thing, in my head, it's like, he's not coming, he's not here physically anymore. At the same time, excuse me, it gives me that, sense of peace that, you're here. Because I could hear him fussing at me. Is he going to box up all of my stuff? Are you, so you're moving me out, and again, it's different. I still playing my head. I was ready to have my house to myself. I wasn't ready for it to have myself like this.
Right.
And now there's a difference between, because he always tell me, I'll move out one day. I'm moving out one day. Yeah, sure you were. And I say that jokingly. To me, there's a marked difference between helping him pack his things to move it to a new place versus I'm packing his stuff and it's not going with him.
Well, one thing that Dr. Wolfelt says in this chapter, or in this, the fifth morning need, with his experiences, remembering, and this kind of, I've read this book I don't know how many times, and I always take something new out of it every time. Remembering the past makes hoping for the future possible.
Yes.
Your future will become open to new experiences only to the extent that you embrace the past. And that little passage, I was reading this again last night in bed, and actually I started crying, but that little passage right there is kind of like, there's the hope.
Mm-hmm.
If even, if you just remember that for a moment, there's where a little bit of hope is, and you can work towards having a happy future.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't lock the past in a closet or put it in that little tidy box, because you're never going to work through everything in order to have that possible future.
Oh yeah, and I like what he says, the need to develop a new self-identity, where he says your personal identity or
Oh yeah, that's a
self-perception
huge one.
is the result of the ongoing process established with a sense of who you are. And it says you may have gone from being a wife or husband to a widower in your case. You may have been going from being a parent, to a bereaved parent, in my case, Carl and Kira,
Right.
Joy and Nick, got to throw the respective, current husband and wife in there, because they were very much a part of Aiden's life.
Right.
The way you define yourself and the way society defines you is changed. And when he goes on to say, you may occasionally feel childlike as you struggle with your changed identity. You may feel temporarily heightened. You may feel a heightened dependence on others, as well as feelings of hopelessness, frustration, inadequacy, or fear. The feelings can be overwhelming and scary, but they are actually a natural response of this important need of mourning. And I think, as I read that, I was like, you have hit something squarely, on, the nail squarely on its head. Because, especially when I hear people say, how many children do you have? I still say 3. And it's not until, if, the conversation goes further, in my head, I hear myself saying, I have 3, but my youngest son is no longer with us. How many grandchildren do you have? I have X number
Can
of
you count them?
grandchildren. It's 23, 24, something like that. I have, I'll just stick on 23
Right.
for a moment. No offense, fam, if I leave one out. But, I have 23, one's not with us anymore.
Right.
In the same time, with my own identity, I find myself also explaining, I lost my grandson. 6 months later, I lost my son. And, people naturally assume Patrick was Aiden's dad. And, and I'm like, no, my oldest son and I now have that in common, other than, that parent-child relationship. He lost his youngest son. I can't say his youngest
Right.
now. He's a 2-year-old. He lost his youngest son, and me as his mom have lost my youngest son, as well.
Right.
With Kira, we went from mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, to our bond being mother-in-law, daughter-in-law. We both lost a child. Me supporting you when you lost Aiden, flipping, the dynamic. You're supporting me after I lost Patrick. And, by default, we support one another. That was in this Touchstone, that was one of my favorites.
Well, and for me, when you're married or living with someone for 30 years, and that is, at that time, that was the majority of my life,
Mm-hmm.
was being Bobby's partner. It's this, with his suicide death, has been different than when I lost my first husband. Back when I lost my first husband, he was killed at work. He was hit by a truck, and people would, when they would talk to me about him or talk about him, they would refer to him as my ex-husband, and I was like, he wasn't my ex-husband. We weren't divorced or anything. He was my husband, and I I just didn't know how to, and that went on for years. Everybody, so many people, not everybody, but so many people, especially even after Bobby and I got together, would refer to Michael as my ex-husband. And I was like, he's not my ex-husband. He died. Somebody took his life. And, and going through kind of a mini identity crisis back then. Mind you, I was in my mid-20s, and I was 54 when Bobby took his life. And we, like I said, we spent nearly 30 years, almost every single day, together. And all of a sudden, in a 2-hour period, your identity and your whole entire life changes from being the spouse, the partner, to being a widow.
Yes.
And I don't know, it's
Which, as we round today out, it takes us to that need number 6. Let others help you now and always.
that's probably one of the hardest ones.
Well,
For me,
we gotcha.
sort of.
Gotcha.
But the other one too is, well, we'll do this one after that one. Because after a while, I don't know, sometimes I feel like people just, they go on with their lives.
I cannot agree with you more. I don't know how many times after, especially after Patrick, Patrick lived here. He lived at home. We shared my house. I was like my house. We shared our house. It was our house together. But you're right. How many people did I hear say, "I'm always here. I'll be with you." I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. There are a few people that, without fail, every, no prompting, reaches out to me and says, "Hey, how you doing?" I think specifically of a group of ladies that were in my graduating class. None of us knew. It wasn't until after Patrick's death that we all became aware of how many of us, ladies in the Jackson Memorial High School graduating class of 1978 shared, that we were mothers who lost a child. And we, the bond of being in a graduating class, that dynamic has changed a little bit because it's like, oh no, by the way,
Right.
I'm with you, so, when I think of, Laura and Robin and Ingy and Lorraine, and I know I'm leaving somebody out, I'm so a mess. I've been there too, and I'm like, what? You too? How much we, are connected. And then, having, being blessed with this platform.
Well, and that's where we skipped one, which I wanted this one to be the last one anyways, is finding the search for meaning.
Yes.
And that's why we're here. That's it isn't something that I or you would imagine we would be doing with our lives at this point,
right.
ever. But this is what helps, and so that we can, bring this information to you guys and help you and let you know that you're not alone. We're, this epidemic that we're fighting, not coronavirus, is going to continue for a while. It's not going away, and we really need to help and support each other, talk, be open about what is going on. We have our purple folders available. through the Foundation for Suicide Loss Survivors. These are the new updated versions. You can go on our website, email us. We can mail them out to you. If you're local, just give us a call. Also on the website is the list of community partners where these are available at. So that you have when you're ready, you may not be ready right afterwards, but when you're ready, you have a little bit of information that may help you. Just get through, even if it's just a moment of a rough period of time. Also, we have coming up, and I'm really excited about this, and I got to say, it's really kind of fast. We have our first T-shirts coming.
I'm so excited.
I'm waiting to get the final, just the design. So hopefully, maybe by next week after, no later, we'll have the images up on. We'll have them available on the screen, and a link to the website where you can purchase them. And I'm really excited about that. And it's one of the 4 designs that we grappled with for the logo. So instead of just tossing them all, we decided we're going to make some T-shirts, and that's another way that you can help us. Purchasing these T-shirts will help fund the foundation and the show. So,
Get the word
and we're
out.
going to have eventually 4 coming out real soon, but the first one's coming real soon. So,
Nice.
please, thank you for joining us. I know it may be difficult, but just please always remember there is hope. And contact one of the hotlines if you need to. Thank you.